In a moment, I'll be joined by a panel of journalists and people from the community engaged in the restoration efforts. But first, Newsnight's Krystel Knowles takes us out to the lagoon to take a look at the work being done there.
Faced with an environmental crisis, Brevard County initiated the Save Our Indian River Lagoon plan back in 2016. Residents had voted in a referendum to pass a half-cent sales tax to pay for it. It was a decisive move, signaling a broad commitment to restoration of the lagoon.
We went and had a lot of community meetings.
Chief Resilience Manager for the City of Cape Canaveral, Zach Eichels, explains where some of the money is going.
It's a fund designed to help set up money that can be tapped for lagoon restoration efforts, both by Brevard County itself and by local municipalities. So that can account for anything such as sewer upgrades, converting septic tanks to sewer systems, getting rid of those legacy loads of muck that are at the bottom of the lagoon that have been there for decades and that are fluxing out material that add to the overall lack of water quality.
But who is to blame for all this pollution? According to officials, everyone. Storm runoff filled with fertilizers and pesticides, septic tanks leaking contaminants, all contribute to the problem.
Sewage spills and pollution from stormwater inputs from municipalities up and down the coast, from development and things like that. So the lagoon has been suffering from a lot of nutrient pollution, specifically from an excess of nitrogen and phosphorus that have been feeding toxic algae blooms.
Last year, a research grant from the Florida Department of Environmental Protection and the county allowed for a company, AECOM, to bring its purpose-built algae harvesting ship into the fight to help restore the lagoon. Here's how it works. Water flows through a collection system on the ship. A chemical is then added to lump together all the algae in the water, so large amounts can be removed from the lagoon. Scientists are still in the process of analyzing the results of the work.
We have an abundance of nutrients. A lot of this is coming in from old septic tanks. We have sewage problems, and we also have legacy fertilizer issues. So we need as many tools as possible to take the nutrients out. And this particular process on how we harvest the algae allows us to provide also clean water back. And a lot of this toxic algae or the blue-green algae really suffocate out the sunlight and starve out the photosynthesis for the seagrasses. And we're looking at ways that we can help mitigate that and reduce that problem.
It's that seagrass die-off that led to hundreds of manatees starving to death in 2022 because of lack of food.
When you start taking away some of those key species, such as like seagrass, it can have a trickle-down effect that affects other organisms that live in the ecosystem as a whole.
To help, Brevard County partnered with the Brevard Zoo, and they are focusing on using a natural filtration system, oysters.
9. Yep.
There's like a couple that have been circling.
Olivia Escandel says these mollusks are small but mighty.
Oysters were once very prolific in Brevard County, but unfortunately years of development and overharvesting, we've lost much of those populations. And oysters are amazing filter feeders. So one adult oyster can filter up to 30 gallons of water in a single day. So we're trying to bring these important native filter feeders back because they can help to improve water quality through a couple different ways, by filtering water and consuming the algae, but they also help to remove nitrogen and phosphorus.
While oysters are nature's natural filtration systems, mangroves provide further assistance to the lagoon by clearing out some of the nutrients and pollutants, which are major contributors to the harmful algae blooms. So what is the purpose of planting mangroves in the shoreline?
We can plant them and their roots can grow out and secure the shoreline from things like erosion caused by wave action. And in doing so, they also create a habitat space for other marine species because they're called the kidneys of the seas. They're so good at filtering water. They're so good at providing habitat.
Scientists and officials say there's an economic impact to restoring the lagoon. Leaders say the waterway is a $7.6 billion annual economic driver. They also predict that even though many groups are involved in cleaning up the lagoon, it's still likely to take decades to get the job done.
I think there's a good chance that the system can be restored to what it was pre-development. I don't know if it could ever go back to the pre-human state per se, But I do believe that through concerted investment and scientific advancement and just general stewardship, that the lagoon can be restored to a level to where it can start to take care of itself and the system can find its own resilience.
NEWSNIGHT's Krystel Knowles reporting. First tonight, NEWSNIGHT's Krystel Knowles has been looking at some of the work taking place in Brevard County.
In coastal communities on barrier islands, a robust resiliency plan is often seen as essential. Satellite Beach City Manager Courtney Barker is all too familiar with the price of living in paradise.
Coastal resiliency is interesting for us because we're a barrier island. So we have the river on one side and the ocean on the other. So on the river side, we worry about flooding. On the ocean side, we worry about erosion. And we are one of the highest eroding areas of the state of Florida. In Satellite Beach, particularly, we have a very strong wave action. So even a normal hard rain can cause a major erosion event. So right now, the county and Army Corps of Engineers is renourishing the beach at this moment.
Creating a more resilient coastline requires a multifaceted approach, and environmentalists and scientists say change needs to happen urgently. The East Central Florida Regional Planning Council's Brenda Defoe-Supranant explains that sea level rise means that completely turning back the clock may not be possible.
When you look in the past, we have seen about a foot of rise over maybe 100 years. And what the data is telling us is that that foot of rise, the window for that is narrowing. So essentially we've seen the equivalent of 100 years of rise in 30 years. One of the issues there is the storm surge and the erosion that comes with that. Compared to on the Indian River Lagoon side, a lot of the area is low-lying, so we're going to see faster rise on that side versus the Atlantic Ocean side.
There are a lot of projects being done now. These are
Dr. Lisa Soto, Director of Operations at Applied Ecology, an organization specializing in ecological studies, is developing future scenarios aimed at understanding the impacts of climate change and sea level rise. It's all to help coastal communities enhance their resilience.
One of the main reasons that we're going to see interior flooding is because the storm system, the infrastructure, really the end of the pipe, usually goes into a water body like the Indian River Lagoon. Very few go into the Atlantic Ocean anymore, but they're going into ponds, they're going into canals, they're going into rivers, they're going directly into this estuary. So what happens when sea level rise comes? The water is going to rise up, that pipe is going to be underwater now, so it doesn't have any place for it to flow. Already, with the king tides, this is submerged. As our stormwater pipes start to fill up with really flood water, or could be tide water like we see in Miami, as the sea level rises, it fills up the stormwater infrastructure. So now where is the stormwater going to go? It can't flow into the lagoon anymore if the stormwater pipes are full of lagoon water already.
In response to the pressing need for coastal resiliency, cities like Satellite Beach are working on changing code to allow new homes to be built on stilts. This would allow storm surge to roll underneath to prevent flooding during large rain events or sea level rise.
Anytime you build on pilings with storm surge, you have a much better survival rate for your structure than if it's on a slab foundation. That type of a construction would be a lot more insurable, in my opinion.
Experts say developers must shift their coastal building strategy.
The worst thing we could possibly do is what we've been doing in the past, which is rip out every tree on a parcel, compact the entire lot till it's almost concrete, and then build impervious surface over the entire lot. What we need to be thinking about is how do we design buildings and design our communities to enable the natural flow of stormwater to go back into the ground.
I think now coastal resiliency has become really center point for a lot of municipalities.
Chief Resilience Manager for the City of Cape Canaveral, Zach Eichels, explains that undertaking beach renourishment projects, implementing stormwater mitigation measures, and creating more green spaces are just some of the ways to make the coastal community stronger.
We're standing here at Veterans Memorial Park, and behind me is a grant-funded project from the National Science Foundation to build a smart rain garden. Basically, this project entails constructing what used to be a dry retention area that really was just covered in St. Augustine grass into a new area that has almost 1,000 Florida native plants that will be able to take more stormwater off of the street and treat it naturally before it enters the Banana River Lagoon. And in doing so, by taking more water off the street, we'll be able to mitigate flooding in the local area.
NewsNight's Krystel Knowles reporting. Well, joining me in the studio now to talk about resiliency efforts here in Central Florida